Welcome, dear viewers, to a new video on the subject of flat Earth and marble Earth. Under my recent videos on this subject, I've got very interesting comments from flat Earth theory supporters. One had recommended a video of the Mann from Stamme der Ostfriesen, that's his channel name, who explained in his video how the sun and moon disappear on the horizon in the evening and reappear in the morning. It is a German language video. He justifies this with the effect of perspective. It is said that because of the perspective, the sun appears small on the horizon and then its size increases rapidly in the morning as it approaches. In that video, the perspective is described completely correctly. Because of the perspective, street lamps, for example, which are of the same size and are installed at the same height, appear to become smaller towards the horizon. If we look at a lamp above us, we see it from an angle of 90 degrees. We see lamps at a greater distance at an even smaller angle, since the horizon itself is always at eye level. All parallel lines meet in a vanishing point on the horizon. In that video, the observer is sitting in London. London is about 51 degrees north and 0 degrees longitude. To be precise, the point 51 degrees north is a little south of London, but that is irrelevant to our calculations. The video assumes that the sun rises at 6 a.m. and sets at 6 p.m. As the Londoner knows from his own observation, this is only the case on 2 days, namely in the end of September at the beginning of autumn and in the end of March at the beginning of spring. With the help of planar trigonometry, we can now do some calculations. For this fact check, we of course assume that the Earth is a flat disk and see what results we get out of it. If we have a right angle and two other facts of the triangle, we can actually calculate everything with planar trigonometry. We always knew two quantities: the distance from us to the point above which the sun is perpendicular and the angle at which we see the sun. I used the German page mathe-retter.de to calculate the lengths and angles. The first consideration must be: how high is the sun above the flat Earth? For this we travel to France. The village of Puy-Normand is located near Bordeaux. On the northern edge of this village we are at 45 degrees north and 0 degrees longitude. Here we are by definition at a distance of 4,995 kilometers from the equator. And at noon, at the beginning of spring and autumn, the sun is 45 degrees high in the sky, viewing south. The two lines connecting Puy-Normand to the equator and the equator to the sun, which is perpendicular to the equator at the beginning of spring and autumn, form an angle of 90 degrees. Because in planar trigonometry the sum of the angles in a triangle must be 180 degrees, it follows that the other two angles of the triangle spanned by the sun, the equator and the observer in Puy-Normand, both at the sun and the observer, must be the same 45 degrees. But then the distances from the equator to the sun or from the equator to the observer must both be the same too. The conclusion is the sun must be 4,995 kilometers above the flat Earth on these days. We are going back to London on 51 degrees north. The distance from London to the equator is 51 multiplied by 111 kilometers is 5,661 kilometers. We again look at the span triangle viewer in London, equator and sun, and can use planar trigonometry to determine the distance between the sun and the viewer. It is 7,550 kilometers. To calculate the distance from the viewer to the sun in the evening and the morning, we need an additional triangle. The sun is now still vertically above the equator at the so-called sunrise or sunset, but at 90 degrees west or 90 degrees east. So we must first determine the distance from London to the coordinates equator 90 degrees west or east. The distance from the North Pole to the equator is 9,990 kilometers. The distance from London to the North Pole is 4,329 kilometers. The distance from London to the coordinates equator 90 degrees west or east is calculated to be about 11,169 kilometers. The distance from the observer in London to the Sun, that is 4,995 kilometers above these coordinates, is about 12,235 kilometers. So the observer in London sees the Sun at the so-called sunrise or sunset at a distance of 12,235 kilometers. For the sake of completeness, let's look at where the observer in London sees the Sun at midnight at the beginning of spring and autumn. Here again we only need one step for the calculation. The Sun is over the equator at midnight on the opposite side of the North Pole, 180 degrees west or east. The distance from London to this point is 14,319 kilometers. The distance to the Sun above this point is 15,165 kilometers. These calculations are of course not only feasible for London but for all places on the flat Earth, because planar trigonometry applies everywhere on our flat Earth, and the atmosphere is the same everywhere on our Earth. It is a bit warmer at the equator, sometimes the air is drier like over the Sahara Desert, but this changes the composition and density of the air only insignificantly. Let us look at the conditions of observers in other places on Earth. Let us first imagine that we are on a ship in the Gulf of Guinea, south of Ghana, at the beginning of spring and autumn. There the equator intersects the Greenwich meridian, so we are at 0 degrees north and 0 degrees west. At noon, the Sun is by definition 4,995 kilometers directly above our heads. In the morning and in the evening, the distance is calculated as follows. Distance to the pole 9,990 kilometers, distance from the pole to the equator at 90 degrees west or east 9,990 kilometers too. The distance from there to the observer at the equator at 0 degrees west or east is 14,128 kilometers. The distance from the Sun above that point to the observer south of Ghana is 14,985 kilometers. At midnight the Sun is above a point on the other side of the Earth 19,980 kilometers away from the observer. The Sun is then 20,595 kilometers away. Let's continue to the sea area southwest of South Africa, to the point 51 degrees south, 0 degrees west or east in the South Atlantic. That is roughly at the level of southern Argentina and southern Chile, or at the level of the Falkland Islands or Malvinas. Here at noon the conditions are like in London, just only that the Sun is in the north and not in the south. The distance from the observer to the Sun is therefore 7,550 kilometers. In the evening and in the morning the positions of the Sun, 0 degrees north, south, 90 degrees west or east, are 18,568 kilometers away, calculated from the distance 51 degrees south to the pole and from the pole to the equator. The Sun is 4,995 kilometers above it, and thus the distance between the Sun and the observer is at 51 degrees south, 19,228 kilometers. At midnight the Sun is at 180 west-east, that is 25,641 kilometers away. The distance between the Sun and the observer then is 26,123 kilometers. Here again the results for London at 51 degrees north. Noon 7,550, evening morning 12,235, and midnight 15,165 kilometers. Let's summarize the results in a table. When looking at the table, we immediately notice that at midnight the Sun is 15,165 kilometers away from London. The Sun is too far away to be seen. It is dark. At the morning and evening, the Sun is 19,228 kilometers away from the ship at 51 degrees south in the South Atlantic. Farther away than at midnight from London, but it can still be seen. That is a contradiction. How is this possible? Before we answer this question, let's take a closer look at the perspective and horizon. How do we see the horizon? From the observer's point of view, the horizon is always at eye level, so we see it at an angle of 0 degrees. Let's assume that a street lamp is installed at a height of 5 meters, 3 meters higher than a person that is 2 meters tall. How far away does the lamp have to be so that we can still see it just above the horizon? Let's say we see it at an angle of 1 degree. Then this lamp, which is 3 meters higher than our eyes, has to be about 172 meters away from us, almost 2 soccer fields. A house being 10 meters high must be 573 meters away, so that we can just barely see it at an angle of 1 degree. The distance from London to the equator coordinates 90 degrees west-east is 11,169 kilometers, as we saw above. With the height of the Sun above the Earth 4,995 kilometers, according to Planar Trigonometry, we see it in the morning and in the evening at a flat Earth at an angle of 23.7 degrees. To be able to see it from London at an angle of 1 degree just above the horizon, it would have to be around 286,000 kilometers away, according to Planar Trigonometry. For comparison, the diameter of the flat Earth is less than 40,000 kilometers. So we have found another contradiction here. Let's summarize the contradictions. We see something that is close to the horizon at a very small angle. In the evening, the observer in London sees the Sun on the flat Earth with a given distance and positions, but at an angle of 23.7 degrees. To be able to see the Sun on a flat Earth on the horizon, the Sun has to be around 286,000 kilometers away. But on the flat Earth, in the evening and in the morning, the Sun is only 12,235 kilometers away. That is a contradiction. At midnight, the Sun is 15,165 kilometers away from London on a flat Earth, and it is dark in London at midnight. In the evening, the Sun is 19,228 kilometers away from the South Atlantic at 51 degrees south. It is still light and dusk is falling. That is another contradiction. Let's look at this figure from the video discussed. At the time of sunset, at the beginning of autumn or spring, the Sun is exactly in the west almost everywhere in the world, except in the area near of the North Pole. As you can see in this picture, the Sun would not be in the west on a flat Earth, but always shifted to the northwest. At the equator, it would be exactly in the northwest at sunset, which is never the case there. That is another contradiction. The video discussed here claims that the Sun and Moon appear to change their size when they set or rise. There are quite a few videos on YouTube that show the Moon rising or setting. As you can see, the Moon is not getting bigger or smaller. That is another contradiction. With these many contradictions to the observations that result from the calculations of the Sun over the flat Earth, I have to regard the theory of the flat Earth as wrong for me. Of course, each of my viewers can continue to believe that the Earth is flat. How this model of flat Earth can then be reconciled with the contradictions, everyone has to work out for himself. I wish you a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you later in the next video. Bye bye. you.